My name is Julie Hart. I'm the Senior Director for Standards and Excellence at the American Alliance of Museums. And today we're going to talk about one of the core documents, an emergency plan, more thoroughly called a disaster preparedness and emergency response plan, but for short, we're just going to call it emergency plan today. And what an emergency plan is a set of written policies and procedures that help prevent or minimize damage and assist in the recovery in the event of emergency. And the key thing here is a plan that's going to mitigate risk. And your plan is really there to protect your assets. That's your staff and your visitors. You need to keep the people who work there safe and the people who visit there safe. And you need to make sure that you're caring for your collections and your facilities in the event of a disaster, an emergency, as well as take steps to, again, mitigate that risk and take preventative care and preventative steps. So there's a number of required elements that go along with an emergency plan, and each core document has a series of required elements, which are the minimum pieces that should be in that document. First and foremost with your emergency plan is it should be tailored to your institution. Not only to your current facilities, but your current circumstances, where you're located, what kind of collections you have, what kind of facility you have, sort of all the unique aspects of your organization. It should cover all the relevant threats that you might experience and risks, but as it's impossible to write a plan that covers and deals with every possible scenario. So that's not the point of it. The point is thinking about what are the biggest threats and risks to your organization. It needs to cover your staff, your visitors, and your collections. So that would include evacuation plans for people, as well as those evacuation plans for collections. And if there's an emergency, do you have key pieces that you'd need to protect in place, that you'd need to evacuate if you had the time, or what happens if you have to recover them? Do you have a series of resources, contacts, etc. in your plan that will help you contact the right resources and put things in place fairly immediately in terms of steps to help, again, mitigate the loss in case there is damage to your collections. Your policy also needs to delegate implementation steps. And this is really important. And it's sort of the hardest piece sometimes to keep up to date. Sometimes your policy, your plan will have names and numbers of people who are responsible for certain aspects of the plan if something happens. So it's really critical to make sure your plan stays up to date as people come and go. And I would say this is a core document that probably needs looking at the most frequently because staff come and go. I've actually seen institutions that build new facilities or modify facilities, change things, and they don't think about changing their disaster plan or their emergency plan at the same time. So suddenly it becomes out of date and out of sync with their actual physical facilities. So you need to have somebody it's really great to have a person appointed that's in charge of this policy and this plan to make sure it stays up to date. And one of the key things about emergency plan is you have to use it. You have to make sure that everybody is really familiar with it and practice it. You need to do emergency planning and preparation drills. And we've often seen that there's lots of formats for emergency plans. There are templates that you can get online that you fill in. There's sample documents that you can get. There's tons of resources out there from government agencies and civic organizations about disaster plans and about disaster planning. So of course you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But again, this is a case where you cannot just take somebody else's product, their template, and put your name on it. You've really got to go through the process of thinking about all the different parameters and manifestations for your situation and making sure you're tailoring it to your physical facility and where you are, because the person who wrote it or the museum that wrote it that you're borrowing the model from could have very, very different circumstances in terms of their physical facilities, their external environment for where they are. So it will take a careful look. And there are many plans that can be, a plan like this is going to be very thorough. So I also recommend having a complementary piece that's more like a quick reference guide. There's often sort of these little flip cards or that type of thing that people have with them. They could keep at their desk or they could keep a copy at home to give them sort of immediate triage and immediate emergency steps. But everybody should still have a copy of the full plan, know where it is. Often recommend they actually have a copy at home too, and not just a copy online, because if you're in an emergency situation and you can't get to something that's electronic, a physical copy is very important to have. And again, I said that there were, your plan can't compensate and cover every single possible scenario. So you do have to think about what's unique to your organization, and that comes into the tailoring aspect too. If you borrow another plan from somebody else and you're in the middle of Kansas, you could probably take out the hurricane section of the plan. Things like earthquake you're more likely to have that risk, for example, in California than maybe in another place in the country, or wildfire or something like that. And a lot of people think when they hear emergency plan, think immediately of those natural disasters. And sometimes people get overwhelmed with thinking about all the things that could happen, and they are a little overwhelmed of how to start this or what could be included. But you can really kind of break down the types of risks into 4 areas, and I think that's a good way to think about this. And one is that there's the natural disaster. As I said, that's where your mind goes first. Fire, flood, hurricane, tornado, that type of thing. There is also mechanical threats, and I think that's probably one of the most appreciated type of threats, and probably the one that you will find you are using your emergency plan for the most. The type of emergencies that you're going to experience the most are sort of those routine things like a pipe burst or a power outage, and think about the impacts of those that could have on life support systems that you need to have if you have some animals or plants in your institution, or say a pipe burst, the sprinklers go off or something. Do you know where shutoff valves for electricity are, or the drainage system, things like that. So a lot of times those are overlooked, and those can often have the most catastrophic outcomes. There's also biological threats. That's things like your pests, your rodents, that type of thing that like to chew on your materials in your collection, as well as a lot of historic houses are plagued with animals that like to live in their attics and their roof, where mice, birds, squirrels, that type of thing. So an integrated pest management system, obviously, in a very important part of your disaster plan. And there is a very key and important link between your collections management policy and your disaster plan. Your emergency plan needs to be, again, have the section on collections. Again, it's not just a how to get people out the door in case of a fire type of plan. There's lots of all those collections aspects you need to think about. And integrated pest management is a good place where they come together. And the 4th type of threat is a human threat. That's things like civil disturbance or active shooter or something like that, which are becoming more common every day. So if you think about the threats in those 4 ways, it can kind of help break them down and help you think about organizing your plan.